Mass protests have returned to the streets of Yangon one day before ASEAN leaders meet for emergency talks on the crisis. Hundreds have marched in Yangon for the first time in weeks. Demonstrations had died down as the military's increasingly violent crackdown made it dangerous to be out on the streets. But this latest protest was short-lived. Crowds quickly scattered when police moved in. Then Waikit joins us live now. Waikit, what do you make of hundreds returning to the streets after weeks of relative calm?
Well, no surprises there because there is renewed attention and renewed focus on Myanmar given tomorrow's summit. The fear is that even though these protests are guerrilla style, rally, protest and then run and hide, there is always that fear, always that risk of protesters dying and perhaps seeing bloodshed again in Myanmar. In mid-April, the Myanmar army had revealed its own set of death toll. It put the figure at 250, which is lower than 750 put out by observer groups. Of course, both sides insist that their figures are robustly verified. They accuse each other of fabricating the figures. But there's also a theory that the Myanmar army had chosen mid-April to reveal those figures so that Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing, when he goes to the summit in Indonesia, he can downplay the situation in Myanmar.
Now, also, can we expect ASEAN leaders to bring about any actual change in Myanmar, or is it just going to be just talk?
Well, frankly, if you look at the surface, it seems that it's just talk, because if you line up all the sentiments, commentaries and interviews that you have with people leading up to the summit, and you put them on a scale, there's a fair share of negative events compared to, there's a fair share of negative sentiments compared to the positive ones. For instance, Thailand and the Philippines, no leaders are attending the summit. Some are already saying that there's no ASEAN centrality to begin with. There's also the question of why ASEAN chose not to engage the democratically elected lawmakers who were ousted from their seats, because they say that for a true resolution to happen, their voices have to be included, not the Myanmar army. Of course, there's also the discussion of ASEAN's non-interference policy, which basically means that ASEAN cannot meddle in Myanmar's affairs. But there's also the invisible elements and invisible dimensions we have to consider. I've been in touch with various experts, some of whom have insights into the workings of ASEAN, and they say that there are within ASEAN many veteran politicians, veteran diplomats, both past and present, who have very strong ties with the Myanmar army that go back decades. And there is no doubt that behind closed doors, behind public scrutiny, they are skillfully negotiating with the Myanmar army chief to convince him to stop the killing, to convince him to let Myanmar invite ASEAN members or ASEAN groups into the country, which could eventually pave the way for mediation on both sides.
Well, I guess we'll hear all about it tomorrow. Thanks very much, Waikit, there with the latest.